Committee of the Whole meeting at 6:31. Number 2, I'd like to make a motion for approval of the minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting held on October 15th, 2019. Have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Number 3, discuss amendment to liquor ordinance, creation of a truck stop classification. Dom, you want to take that, bud?
Sure, Trustee Glatz. So very briefly, before my time, but I think this item was first looked at in early 2018 and was, I believe, made it to a committee level, but was not passed then. The mayor's reintroduced it to amend the liquor code to create 2 new classifications reflecting ongoing changes to state law. So there would be Class U and Class UV liquor license classes. The U and the UV, the only difference between them would be the U would be regulating truck stops as they are, UV truck stops that would have video gaming. All truck stops that would be regulated under this code must follow the regulations set out both by the Illinois Video Gaming Act, state law, and the way the ordinance is currently proposed here, all businesses would be subject to village ordinances and regulations.
Thanks, Dom.
Yep.
Anyone have any questions? Dave, anything you want to add to that? Nope. Okay. We have a motion to move that to the board?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Second. All's in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Number 4, discuss amendments for video gaming regulations. Dominic, you're up again.
Sure. So this one, there's several, my memo is a continuation of the question from a previous Admin and Legal Committee in October, looking at the number of terminals allowed at each establishment in Tinley Park, along with a memo from the village attorney talking about just some recent overall questions that have come up with our ordinances around gaming. So there's one proposed ordinance that has several different changes within it. The first is a continuation of the previous question from October 8th about changing the cap on machines to reiterate from that Admin and Legal Committee, since we have the whole board here for the Committee of the Whole. In June, Governor Pritzker signed Senate Bill 690 into law, which amongst other things allowed a change from 5 machines per establishment to 6 machines per establishment statewide. We've had numerous establishments contact us in the intervening period asking what is the village's stance on this from their ordinances. The full memo here shows what an estimate of revenue that would come in were these establishments who already have 5, were they all to go to 6, has some estimates there of the additional revenue that would come in. So we, as I say here, we recommended then that the full board discuss it, which you have the opportunity to do tonight. The second item here is just, again, clarifying in the rest of the ordinance language that truck stops would be requisite under all village ordinances and already established regulations therein. The third item is creating a provision whereby new businesses cannot request a license unless they've been in business for 365 consecutive days. And the fourth is clarification from the village attorney that thresholds are covered in the video gaming hall liquor license classification, which is its own class. And those are basically the 4 changes that all happen within this ordinance.
Great, Dom. Any, Jake, on video gaming regulations? No? Anyone from the board have any questions?
Do they have to take the 6 machine? I mean, right now they get 5. Do they have to take the 6th one?
No, so we have some establishments that don't even have the full 5. There are a couple that have 3, some have 4. There are over 20 that have 5. So it would be, if the village were to change their local law to allow for 6, it would be the prerogative and at the establishment's own will if they would want to do that. But they're under no obligation to do so.
Because obviously there's another license or another cost to it.
Correct, yes, there is a fee per machine.
Okay.
And with the 365 days of business, have we put some thought into preventing them from scaling back their business if we give them the gaming license after that 365?
Same or there, so,
So they open up a convenience store or whatever it is, and they get the gaming after 365 days, and then they scale back on that convenience store or whatever the establishment is.
yeah, I think that item specifically came out of some earlier discussion from committee, and I think would be amenable to that suggestion. I think it's a good one.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, just looking over the backup material for this one, in G, it looks like new additions, 1 through 6. Are those are just rough drafts, I assume, or they seem to contradict each other from time to time?
Yeah, so that's draft language from the attorney. If there's any contradictory things therein, I think village attorney could speak to that, but I think he meant it as draft language.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the ones at the beginning, the applicants over 21 years of age, they've not committed crimes, those types of things. Does Illinois regulate a lot of those? Do we need to actually put those provisions in?
There's some similar language, I believe, in the state law. I'd have to do some further research to see what exactly is mirrored, but if there is replicate language, again.
We'll just cut it from ours so that we don't
Yeah.
duplicate? Okay.
For sure.
Diane, you had something, Diane?
Yes. The question I had was making sure that the businesses, their main business is a larger percent of their business over the percent of the gaming income. And I had heard from the attorney that there is there's another ordinance on the parlors already. So I'm wondering, what is the verbiage on that would stop, from anybody who's getting the gaming from becoming a parlor? What does it state in there?
Sure. So maybe I'll speak to it, then maybe if the mayor wants to jump in there as well. So there is a video gaming hall already on the ordinances that, within that language, specifically, if there was any establishment that were trying to have the majority of their business come from the gaming, it would specifically go in that category. It's been the precedent of this board, and I believe previous boards, that none of those have, been in operation. So I think that in this memo, I don't want to speak for the village attorney, but I believe his thought was that class covers the thought of making sure businesses aren't, having the vast majority of their revenue coming from the gaming, and that they are indeed coming from food, beverages, et cetera.
Do you know how it states that, though? I mean, is it 5%, 10%, 70%?
I believe the language says majority. I would have to.
It says majority.
Yeah.
You know what, in the backup, it's, on item number 5, it just says 60% of total revenue annually from the sale of food or beverages. That's item number 5 on page 14. So it's, I think that's kind of my concern too, is that this is, that their primary business isn't going to be scaling back, just kind of piggyback on what Mueller said, is that they're not going to be scaling back their primary business in order to be a gaming parlor, so.
Yep.
Sure.
How often is that going to be reviewed, or if at all, is it being done right now?
So for right now, the percentages, because this has come up in the past few discussion cycles with the board of having them look at that revenue, I think this is sort of a new effort to do like a full examination of those revenue numbers. I'm not sure that that's happened exhaustively in the past because it hasn't been tracked by the mayor. Yeah.
It's more black and white in this particular scenario, whereas
Yeah.
before it was just a general cursory review of what the business is, and generally speaking, you can figure out the function of it by looking at their proposal. But this, I think, would be an opportunity to kind of make it a black and white situation, make it codified so that there is no gray area when we're reviewing or when somebody puts an application in.
And the idea that the burden would be on the applicant to show that. So it would be something that we'd want staff searching for, things like that. It would certainly be their burden.
I think that's great.
Okay.
Anything else you wanna add to it, Jake?
I kind of walked in probably in the middle of your presentation, Dominic, but it's a commendable job so far. I mean, you and Pat and your firm, thank you for kind of doing some research, putting together some information for the board to review, and I'm pretty sure, I know what you presented to him, so I'm confident that you presented it factually, so.
Okay. We have a motion.
I'll make that motion.
We have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Bill. Number 5, discuss economic incentive agreement between the village of, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. 5, discuss economic incentive agreement between the village of Tinley and Banging Gavel Properties LLC. Is that you, Dave?
I'll do an overview. So this is a project that's been before the board before. We approved an incentive agreement with Banging Gavel a couple years ago. The project has had some delays. Jim Rickard is here to kind of talk a little bit about that, some of the challenges he's had with the state. And essentially, so the old agreement needs to be updated. And so what is being proposed is essentially the portion of the incentive dealing with historic preservation, which is $450,000. Under the current agreement is proposed at the full occupancy. Now, Mr. Rickard is talking about doing this in phases, where essentially the first phase would be a tap room, brewery, and an outdoor area. That essentially would be 90% of the building. That he would get $300,000 of that $450,000 at that time, and then the remainder of the $150,000 at that time, and then the remainder of the $300,000 at phase two, when the kitchen and event room opens. So, again, I think as Mr. Rickard explained, this is a project that certainly has taken longer. I think, as everyone knows, because of the historical nature of this building, this is not a cookie-cutter project by any means, and difficult to do, and we're glad certainly he's taking it on and bringing something unique to downtown. And it's something based on this that we would recommend that this go to a revision of the agreement and come back to the board at a later date. But I think, Jim, do you want to?
I'm happy to address any questions or concerns that members of the board or staff may have.
You want to start at, Bill, you have any questions?
What, I can just imagine by the amount of problems you've had with the state, anything specific, or just?
Well, I wouldn't say anything
working?
particularly specific. It's just that the project as a whole has been met with a lot of challenges. And, you know, we have an agreement with the village that we're going to retain the historical status for that site. And in doing so, we have to abide by the strictures that are put upon us by the state and the feds. This is both registered statewide and federally. So we have to, in designing what we were doing, our mechanical people had a nightmare trying to figure out how do we vent this place, and, you know, the systems. We went through multiple different designs and systems. And every time you make a change, it has to go through review, and they have to be okay. But that's just one example. Then in like early January of last year, we had to have wood samples from our floors. If you go in that building, you'll find little chunks of floor that are missing, and they were sent out to Wisconsin to a lab to be analyzed to make sure that we're using the right materials when we do this renovation work. Well, the samples got sent up to Wisconsin, then the government shut down. And so right there was another month period of time where we sat there just twiddling our thumb. We couldn't do anything. So it's just been one thing after another. But I talked to our architects over the weekend, and they assure me that the final plans for permit is coming to the village by the end of this week. So we're getting close to the finish line, at least to the extent where we can actually start construction.
Okay, thank you.
Bill?
Yeah, my only question is, since we're proposing to do this in phases, it says that 90% of the project will be complete after phase one, correct?
Yeah, it basically, and the reason that is because phase two is also being worked on during phase one, if you will. So, you know, it's like, phase two is essentially the second floor of the building, which will be the main kitchen and the event space. We have another kitchen down in the brewery section, which will provide food until we open up the main kitchen. So I want to say it's 90% complete, because all the rough work and all the, stuff that you have to do before you actually finish off the second floor is being done during phase one.
Okay, so it will have a kitchen.
We're going to have a full kitchen.
Okay.
And I believe the plans you said you're submitting is the full building.
The plans that are being submitted this week will encompass the whole
Everything.
project, yes.
Trustee Mueller?
It's changed a little bit over time, so what's the current kind of atmosphere of the place going to be like? The atmosphere Full doesn't really restaurant? change much, but actually, I always say things happen for a reason, and ironically, I think in this case, that holds true too, because originally we had the main kitchen designed on the first floor. But now by moving it up to the second floor, what we've done is we've opened up a lot more seating capacity on the main floor, which is where the tap room is. So I think, the feel, that's not changing. But, I think it's actually a better situation for us and for our customers.
Thank you. Mayor Vandenberg?
Oh, he answered my question. Thank you.
Trustee Galante?
I guess I thought what the change was the kitchen, was not having the restaurant part.
No, we're
So
going
I
to have,
guess what's the change here then? from phase-
basically, it's basically, what it is that we're doing this in 2 phases, even though.
So what would be the second phase?
Second phase is the completion of the kitchen on the second floor and the finishing off of the second floor. So we'll be able to open and be operational at the close of Phase 1, which would be the beer garden, the brewery, and the beer garden would be weather permitting, obviously, but we'd have the tap room open, and we'd be able to have food available as well. So we'll essentially.
Your main kitchen will be open?
I'm sorry?
Main kitchen of the restaurant will be open?
We have 2 kitchens. We have a kitchen downstairs in the brewery section, and we have the main kitchen upstairs on the second floor, yes.
Okay. So you'll be using both for the restaurant?
Once we open once we open the whole operation, then both kitchens will be in operation. The downstairs kitchen will be primarily for the purpose of serving our guests in the beer garden.
Okay. Yeah, for me, I guess, as long as, for Phase 1, I mean, what I liked about this whole project was the restaurant, was
Yep.
everything looking down through the floor of the restaurant into the, I'm not sure if that's still part of the plan, but looking into your,
Well, that
Equipment,
honestly
I'm not sure what you call it.
was not part of the plan for a long time, the opening up the floor area. For a couple of reasons. It was, historical was not going to let that fly. And secondly, we'd lose a lot of floor space, and it's a lot of seats.
True.
So, yeah.
okay. But as long as you're saying that Phase 1 would be, the opening of that restaurant. I just want to make sure we're making this
No, I
hope
understand.
that area is becoming a family, plaza.
Right.
We need that restaurant.
No,
is what
the
I'm hoping is
close on
Phase
Phase 2 will be closely after the close of Phase 1, because that event space means a lot of revenue for us, quite frankly. So, we're pushing to get that done quite as quickly as possible.
Trustee Burke?
Well, I see that everything is based on tax rebates. I'm not really certain of the financing of the situation here. What's that?
Sorry?
There is some.
There's a,
Yeah.
there's a portion of the incentive agreement, which is tax incentive-based. That's the $250,000. And that, well,
Sales tax rebate is after you're working,
yes, that's after
after
we're
you're
open.
open.
Correct, yes.
But in the new agreement, we would be foregoing a sales tax
Oh.
share with him.
I'm not aware of that.
What?
Yeah, I'm confused.
I don't think we're foregoing that.
Well, I think you were saying you didn't think you'd.
I'll
Yeah.
be
You
honest
need
with
the
you, I
numbers.
think anybody in
Yeah.
this room that knows math and knows
Yeah.
how taxes operate will probably never see that money, is what I'm saying. But, hey, if we happen to, great, it's there for us. But as a practical matter, it'd be almost impossible to achieve
Yeah.
the numbers in order for us to even be entitled to that tax rebate.
So are we saying then he would just give that up?
He's got to reach, what he's saying is that he's got to reach certain benchmarks, which are
Almost
probably not
insurmountable.
going, almost impossible to happen. So the numbers are in there, it's it's based on certain numbers
It's
coming
performance-based.
in.
Yeah, it's
And,
performance-based.
You know,
which-
it's
It's an incentive for him
250,000.
to, it's an incentive for him to blow it out of the park.
Right.
Okay.
It's
Which we would have to do.
250,000 over 10 years, that's 25,000 a year. Brad and I can tell you, I mean, that is even if you went beyond your
Right.
wildest dreams, you'd be
Right.
lucky to get some
Right.
money from that. So it's an incentive that's available, but probably
Never going to be achieved.
gonna be a challenge. I would never say never, because we want you to get
I mean,
it.
if we do, great. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not good sure he's
No.
not getting anything more. It's just, he would drop that off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you were getting 150 up front.
But that was always going to happen. So that, we just want to make sure we understand. So that 150 was always going to be up front. That wasn't on the sales tax. You're just asking for it a little earlier than what you would have done.
well, the way the original agreement was formatted was we'd get 450 at the completion of the entire project. What we're asking for now is 150 to be placed into a joint construction escrow, which would be available. And you have to also take the note that upon completion of Phase 1, we will have completed 100% of the historical renovative work, which is one of the benchmarks that we had to achieve in order to be entitled to this money.
one of my questions for you, Jim, is I'm a huge supporter of the project. Are you done with the red tape?
I believe we are, and that's why we're bringing the plans this week for the village to review.
'Cause that's my only fear is, you know, the historical building, you're running into more issues.
Right.
Yeah,
That's,
I think we,
would be my fear as well, Mike. But, no, it looks like, I mean, I guess, you know, on the upside, because this has been so difficult and we had to go through so many reviews and so many changes and so on and so forth, that I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that from this point forward, it should be fairly clear sailing.
Any other questions?
No, I'm not a huge fan of the way the money's moving in the other direction, but we'll get a historical building that's all fixed up at the end of this, so I think that's the
And
silver lining.
the garden is just
Yeah,
unbelievable.
really nice looking.
Yeah.
So is this contingent on this $150,000 that we review all these plans first, the permit? I think we'd like to see more.
I think the idea is that the first 150 would be due upon, I don't know, would it be the CO after phase one or whatever?
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, our
Right.
final review, you know, so the plans will get reviewed as they normally would by the department. They'll be back and forth there. And then they'll get permits to build, or not build, but renovate.
Yeah. We have demolition permits in place already, but we were hesitant to really do any major demolition work without getting the plans
Putting the cart in
approved.
front of the horse, which I don't think we are. I mean, we have to pass. Can you clarify your question again, or, I think I'm understanding it, but I just want to
I
make
was
sure.
wondering, are we waiting to see the rest of the plans before we invest $150,000 into the deal here?
Yes, yeah, he wouldn't
Yeah,
get
we-
the 150,000 until those plans are reviewed, approved, and then they actually build. So it'd just be, instead of waiting for the entire project to be complete before the incentive being available, it would be, I guess, 90%, you know.
Yeah, roughly, the project would be roughly 90% complete at that point in time. And all the historical renovation work would be completed at that time as well.
Well, I know last time we talked, there was a financing problem. Is that all resolved then?
I'm not sure what you mean by a
I
financing
thought there was
problem.
not a loan available.
Well, we were with a different bank at that time,
Okay.
and we're with a different lender at this time.
Who will not finance the 150 in order to get started, or?
I'm not sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but wasn't the 150, are we doing this because of, to go to what Steve
Okay,
was saying?
yeah,
As far as the bank needed to show for collateral?
Yeah, essentially what it is, in this case, because the cost of the project has gone up significantly, and we were able to carve some of that back, but because of the increase in the cost of the construction project, the bank wants to see another infusion of capital. They will treat the 150 that's being put into a construction escrow as an infusion of equity. The other 300 will not be treated as such.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically he needs the 150 to show for the bank to show as collateral.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just not comfortable with that. I feel like restaurant business is a huge risk, and the village really shouldn't be in that business. No offense, I like the project, but I wish that the bank would be more equitable, not from using the village funds, but your own.
Well, we've got our own funds in it, trust me.
Yeah, I think the village is investing the 150,000 into this project. If it's
Well,
six-
back to what Trustee Mueller said, exactly. I mean, it's a historic building that we're going to hold into our, the history of Tinley and continue to hold the value on it, and we're investing in that, not so much the business. I mean, the business is great, but, I mean,
It's coming along for the ride.
Yeah.
It's not the main focus.
and I think that's an agenda set forth by previous boards. I mean, we want to hold the character of what downtown Tinley Park's all about by investing, having people invest in the buildings as is. If not, we would just let them demo and build up, which would probably be cheaper, wouldn't it, Jim?
It would be a lot cheaper. It
If you
would.
have any historical questions, just ask Brad. He knows everything about it.
I guess tonight, we'd be looking for direction on the concept, right? And-
Well, I think we have to redraft.
Correct.
Redevelopment agreement and bring back to the
So
board.
you'll see what
First
the
meeting
joint
in
escrow
December.
says and things like that. You'll get the fine print, but I think tonight it's more of, are you okay with this conceptually? And then we'll put it on paper and bring it back.
and redraft the agreement, yeah.
Yeah.
So, do you have a motion
To direct us to move forward.
to direct them to move forward with this?
Yes.
Do you have a second?
Make it second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
I was a nay.
Is there
Nay.
One day.
Sorry.
An opposition?
That's okay.
No offense, sir.
All right, so it's been